are moving into summer, shifting from the winter season. There are some broiler management tips that farmers should learn. So today we'll be talking about the short tips that farmers should know when they are rearing their broilers during the summer season. So point number one, the area to take note of is the issue to do with temperature management, because as we are moving from winter to summer, it means that we are experiencing challenges of temperature elevations. Most of the broiler farmers experience temperature elevations, and also that affect the overall optimal performance of the birds. So farmers should know that ventilation should be taken note of. It's a key factor that affects eating behavior of the birds. And as you know that when you are raising broilers, we are targeting meat. So if those birds don't feed well, or they don't feed properly, it means that they take too long in the production. That overly affect the pocket of the farmer as well as the overall performance of the bird. So when we are constructing our fowl runs, we have to make sure that we follow what we call east-west orientation. East-west orientation meaning that the eastern and western side of the fowl run must be completely closed to avoid direct end penetration of sunlight into the fowl run. And the northern and southern part of the fowl runs must be completely open to allow free air circulation into the fowl run. When there's free air circulation into the fowl run, it means there's reduced challenges to do with moisture litter. There's also reduced challenges to do with reduced feed intake to the broilers, because broilers, as you know that broilers, just like pigs and other animals, they do not have sweat glands. So the only way they can cool their body is either by having free air circulation into the fowl run, or else they'll be panting, doing wing flapping, or drinking more water too much. So you notice that there must be always availability of water, point number one. Point number two, you shall notice that there must be always good free air circulation. So those birds, for them to feed properly, you will notice that the birds feed properly during the cooler parts or cooler times of the day. And that is either early in the morning or mostly some later times of the day. And during the day, mostly they'll be concentrating more on water. While they are concentrating more on water, we should put vitamin and mineral supplements. Those vitamins and mineral supplements are there to revitalize the body system of the bird, so that by the time they start feeding well, they'll be properly feeding and feeding enough to compensate the hours that they were not feeding during the day or during the water parts of the day. So just to make sure that the farmers won't get confused during the brooding, the principles that we use during the brooding must be maintained, but simply because we are moving from the cold at the time of the season to moving to the water part of the year, it means that the systems or the temperatures that we need during the brooding, as we see, ideally we need 32 to 35 degrees during brooding. We have to maintain all those temperatures, but it mustn't go higher above those temperatures or lower below the minimum levels of those temperatures. So farmers must take note that if we are moving from the winter to the summer, it doesn't necessarily mean that even if we need good air circulation into the fowl run, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to overlook the issues to do with temperature management during brooding. We have to maintain the relative or the required temperature ranges that are required during brooding phase. So, rule of thumb: when you are placing your beds, check the age of the parents for those chicks. Point number one. Point number two: make sure there is adequate equipment. Point number three: make sure there is also good feed distribution in the fowl run. Point number three: make sure that temperature is properly set within the proper range of 32 to 35 degrees Celsius, so that your birds performs well. And we need to know as farmers that performance of bird is direct correlation or direct relationship with temperature management. If you don't manage our temperatures very well, then it does necessarily mean that even if our feed is of high quality, but your birds will not perform well, because temperature plays a pivotal role in terms of muscle packaging, in terms of all the metabolic drives that take place within the body of an animal to perform well. On the layer issue, I'm going to touch on the area of production phase. As you know that when we are doing layers, there are two phases that we go through during production of layers. There's rearing phase, that is the point whereby we are raising or managing our birds from day old up to week 18. Then from week 18 up to week 22, it's also a special and critical phase that farmers need to take consideration of, which you call point of lay, where all birds are now coming into production so that we start harvesting our money. So I'm going to touch on the management tips that are required or a farmer needs to know from week 18 up to end of lay. So we have got a specific or different types of breeds that we have as in layers. There's HN breed, there's also highline breeds. So most of the farmers, because the most common breed for layers is highline, so most of the farmers, they do have highline breeds. So for highline breeds, they can go into production for 1.5 to 2 years. That is from week 18 up to 100 or 110 weeks. It's a long way, so we need to make sure we are managing them very well. So there are 2 things that farmers need to be cognizant of, or 3. Point number 1, farmers need to make sure that for the birds to perform optimally or to perform profitably, there must be adequate feed. And also point number 2, in as much as we need adequate feed for layers, but we also need to make sure that layers, they are not reared to produce meat, they are only reared to produce eggs. So there's also need to follow a restricted feeding system, which is critical for layers. Point number 3, for layers to perform well, they also need a good lighting program, which farmers must also take note. Point number 4, for them to perform well, in as much as there's good lighting program, there's availability of water, there's availability of feed all the times, there's also need to respect an issue to do with air circulation. So during production, each bird must be taking 115 to 120 during summer, simply because it's now a water time of the season. So it means the fowl runs need, or the bird, for them to perform well, they need less temperature. So we need to be giving them less of the feed. Also, they require less energy because it's water as well. So we need to give them less feed. So give them 120. So 120 grams per bird per day is enough. We don't need to overfeed our birds, because overfeeding our birds, it means the birds are going to be fatter. For them being fatter, it also affects the estrus synchronization, which affects the coordination of hormones in the body that participate in egg production, and the hormones that include luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. That's point number 1. Point number 2, you would also notice that your birds started to be affected by management related issues that has to do with fat liver syndrome. They're becoming too fat and having a lot of big fat layer accumulating around the vital organs such as liver, and you actually start seeing your birds dying. Point number 3, you start seeing your birds producing bigger eggs, and those eggs affect the reproductive system, and each bird struggle to push the egg during laying. You start seeing your birds dying through internal laying, what we call egg prolapse. So we need to make sure that we keep all those areas, because it affects the psychology of a bird, and it also stresses the bird. Once the bird becomes stressed, it also means the production is affected. Point number 3, the hormonal action of a bird is stimulated by light. That is stimulating hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, because those are the ones that participate in the build-up of an egg within the body of an animal or a bird. So if those hormones are affected, it means now either the clutch is going to be small or it's going to be delayed. Once the clutch is delayed, it means there's no eggs. So we have to make sure our birds get 14 to 16 hours of light every day. So in the morning, we have to switch on our lights at 5 o'clock and switch it off at 7 o'clock a.m. Then you run through the day, you switch off only your lights at 4 p.m. Then you switch off your lights at 7 p.m. If you switch your lights at 7 p.m., it means you have 14 hours of the day having your birds exposed to light. But if you switch it at 9 p.m., then it means your bird gets enough light up to 16 hours. But let's make sure that the time our birds are stimulated or exposed to light mustn't go beyond 16 hours or go below 14 hours. So that, because if you overstimulate our birds, it means the clutch becomes bigger and you start having the issue to do with soft shells and other related factors that have to do with overstimulation. If you understimulate, it means the clutch size or even the clutch will be disturbed, and you also start noticing the issue to do with the reduced egg production in the system. So we have to make sure our lighting program is in space of 14 to 16 hours. We have to make sure that our feed is always within spec and we have to feed 120 grams per bird per day. We have to make sure there's ventilation, because if birds are affected by temperature management, because ventilation, if there's poor management of ventilation, then it means that there's accumulation of temperature. Once the bird becomes affected with temperature, they got stressed and stop producing eggs. So we have to make sure also that during summer it's hot, so water must be always available, or even supplement with what you call vitamins and mineral supplements, so that the birds got their mindset in place to produce the eggs. So let's make sure all these things are in place so that our birds don't affect it and we harness more money during summer. So change in seasons mustn't be our limitation to the production cycle, production scale that we are supposed to be getting. Let's make sure we are always geared up for every season that comes in to make sure the production is always on spec. Thank you.